I've had a Reflash DCU from 550 Performance in my bike for over 1,000 miles at this point, and it's still working away just fine, but the question is it worth it? Let's talk about the Reflash here from 550 Performance. It took quite a few years for someone to actually make a Reflash for these ECUs, but the second I found out about these, I jumped on it. I love a Reflash as opposed to the other things that I've had to do with this bike, which was one of two things. The first and cheapest option would be a piggyback system. In line between the fuel injector and the ECU, a piggyback system, like JD Jetting for example, would interrupt the signal given from the ECU to the injector to tell it to change the fuel at any given point, and then you would be able to add or subtract fuel from there. The second and definitely more expensive option is just a full ECU replacement. This is your Ames, your Athena Gets, your Vortexes. Vortices? Yeah, Vortices. This just replaces the restricted stock ECU for something remapped all on its own. It just simply ignores everything that Honda did and starts from scratch. Much more powerful, yes, but definitely much more expensive, the high end being over $1,000. A Reflash, on the other hand, takes what Honda did and makes a few little tweaks here, adds a little more fuel there to make something that's more powerful, less restrictive, and with robust stock components. The perfect happy middle in my book. But it's not all puppies and rainbows, it still has its quirks.
Let's see how it does with a cold start. Oh, it hesitated a little bit. Usually when I hit the button, it'll go on for about a second or two and then kind of die away, like the idle's too low almost. All right, let's roll.
Now this Reflash is not one size fits all. You can specify what level of performance you want as well as specifics that matter, like what header you're running, what exhaust you're running, and what filter you're running, so you can get the best out of it. My Reflash, based on everything that I have on my bike, is the middle stage 0.5 with CRF450X everything and a stock air filter. But this is actually my second Reflash. After I provided my initial review, 550 Performance reached out and offered me an update that's a little more tailored to me and my riding style. So something a little more street oriented and something that hopefully helps with the fuel economy, because with my first few fill-ups with this Reflash, it was more than a bit thirsty. So, any changes?
All right, we're coming up to a light here. Let me see if I can show you something that I've discovered. I'm not necessarily blaming this on the Reflash, because there was a number of things that I did in addition to that. I also changed the front sprocket, so that went up a little bit to lengthen the gears. And I've also done things to the throttle tube, so now I have a throttle tamer of sorts in this, a throttle cam, so that it lengthens out that initial throttle response as well. But around the time that I got the Reflash reprogrammed, I found that from a stop, maybe the sound picked up a little bit, but it seems like it hesitates just ever so slightly. See there, it did that sound. Another reason why I think it might be sprocket related is because if I actually think about it and give it more revs when I start, it's fine. And sometimes that little instance makes me think, what would happen in that same case if I was off-road, where a lot of people will have that flame-out issue? Is that still prevalent? Which I actually don't know, because I have not tested that, honestly. Well, maybe it's time we do that. Single track is a little hard to find out here, but as you can see, this is pretty rocky, pretty ruddy, and very steep. Let's see if it stalls. And I'm doing this on Sumo tires, keep that in mind. Grip is at a premium. Woo-hoo-hoo! Might as well do a little bit more single track while I'm out here and enjoy the off-road. Despite the street tires, you can still do it. Now the stuff that I'm doing right here is not super difficult. It is a little rocky in some areas and even sandy in some others. So you do get a good variety of terrain. And yes, maybe I'm going a little bit faster than a flame out would allow. But even on the small stuff where I'm really bogging it, and where I think otherwise with a stock ECU, I would definitely have stalled it at the very least. No problems. And so far that's no problems, even with that little stumble that I get from a stop to a start. Well, we're actually coming to a downhill right here, so let's actually stop 100% and start and see if that does anything. Spun out the rear a little bit there, but all good. You know what? Supermoto is actually pretty fun in the dirt. It's a little slower, a lot more slidey, and I'm smiling just as wide. Well, that was fun. I say it every time I hit dirt, but I gotta do that more often. Maybe even do it with some knobbies on it as well.
Yes, this was a brief dirt session, not very extensive when it came to trying to find out if there were any flame out issues, and I gave it an honest effort to try to kill the engine, I guess, but everything worked out just fine. Maybe the Reflash had something to do with that. But my review is ultimately coming from a street perspective where flameouts just don't happen. Ultimately, the feeling that I get with the Reflash is with hard cornering, hard acceleration, and hard deceleration, where that transition between acceleration and braking is felt. Speaking of transition,
it does have a nice transition from roll off to roll on. Still very smooth. But again, it's not dulled. And I think I mentioned this in the prior video, but the Vortex seems like it's a little dulled. This one, it still has a little bit of that snap. And I like having a little bit of that snap because it's fun. Whether it's fast corners or very, very slow full lock corners, I think this Reflash will handle it. I mean, I lean any more, I'm on the ground. Yeah, like that. You know, something else I noticed with the fuel light, and I don't know if this is just the tune and the characteristics of the new ECU Reflash, if there is any differences there, or it's just me being hyper aware of this now that I'm actually focusing on fuel mileage, but the light seems to come on a lot sooner. Normally, when I had the stock ECU, I think I would get about, 60, 70, maybe even 75 miles before that light came on. And I know the light comes on pretty early, and it's not necessarily that you need to go straight to a gas station, but now it's coming on at like 59. It came on at 59 today.
Let's talk fuel economy. This was one of my biggest sticking points with the Reflash initially, and at the time I had only done a couple of fill-ups, so my drop in miles per gallon, I didn't know whether or not that was the trend or I just happened to have a little more twisty in the wristy that week. But now that I have a lot more mileage out of it, we know for sure. I track all of my fill-ups, so I get mileage and miles per gallon updates every time I fill the tank. And in my last video, I showed you that I got 48.59 miles per gallon on average with the stock ECU and 44.47 miles per gallon average with the Vortex. And for the Reflash, 42.75. But that was the number with the first Reflash. Remember, I got this reflashed with fuel economy in mind, and that figure, 42.9. No change whatsoever. Normally this would upset me, and it still kind of does, until you factor in the cost of a full ECU against the Reflash. With just a rough estimation, the extra money that I'd be putting towards a Vortex over the Reflash could equivalently get me like 50 fill-ups on this bike, and that adds 3,500 miles or so on the odometer, and that's California prices we're talking about.
But at the end of the day, and it is literally the end of the day, it's almost like I planned that. I've been saying a lot about the Reflash, but ultimately it just boils down to it just works, and that's how it should work. I don't have to think about it. I should just be able to throw a leg over this, turn it on, and ride the bike like I normally would without having to think about anything else. I just ride the thing. And with the Reflash, I get that, and I get the best of all worlds, honestly. I have stock components, I have extra horsepower with remapping, and I am at a fraction of the cost of all of the other alternatives. There are consolations with that, I admit. I'm not getting as much horsepower as I could with the other alternatives, and my fuel economy, at least for me, has been less than ideal, but it's a small price to pay. About the price of a Reflash, actually. So I highly recommend heading on over to 550performance.com where you can get more of the details on this Reflash, and oh, what's this? My dash panel? Why, yes it is. That's right, 550 Performance also sells my patent pending dashboard panel, not really patent pending, for all your USB charger, 12 o'clock labs, tachometer, whatever the heck you want needs. So when you go and pick up that Reflash, why don't you pick up a panel too?